You may be wondering how you can share your assigned course materials with your class. Fortunately, there are many legal paths you can take to provide your students with quality learning resources. It's important to know that when posting course materials, you must abide by Title 17 of the U.S. Code, which, as you might have guessed, outlines copyright law. Before we get started, I want to note that the information in this video is not legal advice, but is offered to assist you in making appropriate decisions for using materials in your classroom. There are a number of factors to consider when making copyright determinations. In this video, we're going to provide you with a few quick tips to help you get started, but remember that copyright considerations can be quite complex and may sometimes be beyond the scope of this video. When making copyright decisions, there are a few questions that you should consider. Let's take a look at them. The first question you need to consider is the material you want to use covered by copyright? To answer that question, you need to know what copyright protects and does not protect. Copyright protects original works of authorship that have been expressed in a tangible form, such as literary, dramatic, musical, and artistic works. Copyright does not protect ideas, facts, processes, or concepts, but the way in which those things are expressed can be protected. For example, raw data is not protected by copyright, but a visual interpretation of that data would likely be copyrighted. It's important to remember that copyright can apply to both published and unpublished works. There are many materials that are in the public domain whose copyright has expired or been forfeited. For example, anything that was published in the United States before 1924 is now in the public domain. For help determining if an item is in the public domain, visit the resources provided at the end of this video. If an item is not protected by copyright or is in the public domain, you're welcome to use those items however you'd like in your class. Now, let's move on to the second question. Did you know that there are licenses that may allow you to share materials with your class? The library provides thousands of electronic resources that you may use in your classroom, including peer-reviewed articles, newspapers, images, and film. While library license agreements vary, you are usually allowed to provide links to these resources, even when downloading and reposting is prohibited. The library can help by providing permanent links to those materials that provide your students with full text access, and can even add these materials directly to Blackboard for you. Library licensing is not the only type of license that can help you and your students access materials. Another type of license that allows you to use copyrighted materials is the Creative Commons licenses. Some authors choose to grant you permission to use their copyrighted works in specific ways. There are a variety of Creative Commons licenses, but I want to share with you some of the most popular ones. A Creative Commons license that you may see is the CC0 designation, which designates that an author has dedicated an item to the public domain. You may also come across the CC BY license, which allows you to share the material with your students if you provide attribution to the author. Like I mentioned earlier, there are other types of Creative Commons licenses, but the important thing to remember is that these licenses often allow you to freely share course materials with your students, as long as you follow their terms. You'll know an item has been released under a Creative Commons license when you see some form of this symbol. Now that you know a little bit about the different types of licenses, let's move on to the third question. What if you don't have a license to use a particular material and is covered by copyright? Good news, you still have options. If you run into this situation, the first thing that you can do is look to see if there's a specific exception in the copyright law that will permit your use. Section 110 of the Copyright Law, the exemption of certain performances and displays, is the most relevant for the use of course materials, although there are many other exceptions provided in the law that you may wish to explore through the recommended resources. Section 110.1 permits the performance or display of a legally obtained and made work during face-to-face teaching activities in a nonprofit educational institution, such as the University of South Carolina. Because this section only permits face-to-face performances or displays, it is not applicable to online teaching. Section 110.2 of the Copyright Law, commonly called the TEACH Act, is an exception that was created with the intention of updating the Copyright Act to apply to online teaching. The TEACH Act sets forth the requirements which allow online teachers to legally transmit audiovisual works, images, and other works in an online setting. The requirements are complex, but were designed to mirror the face-to-face instruction exception. For example, copyrighted materials shared online through the Teach Act must only be available to students currently enrolled in the course, much like how a video is shown in an in-person class would only be available to students present in the classroom. There are many practical, policy, and technological requirements that all must be met to share items under the Teach Act, and many instructors find that abiding by these restrictions is challenging. If you'd like to learn more about complying with the Teach Act, we encourage you to investigate the resources presented at the end of this video. Now, let's explore an area you might already be familiar with: fair use. If you've determined that the material you'd like to use in your class is copyrighted, not covered by a license that allows you to use it in class, and is not covered under another copyright exception, it may still be covered under the broader and more flexible doctrine of fair use. Generally speaking, a use is fair when the copying of copyrighted materials is limited in scope and is done for a transformative purpose. There are 4 factors to examine in turn before deciding if your use is fair. Each factor is important, and they must be evaluated as a whole before making a decision. The first factor asks you to examine the purpose and character of your use. When considering your use, do you intend to transform the original work by adding new expression or meaning? If you merely duplicate the item, this factor weighs against your fair use. However, if, for example, you have added significant value or commentary to the resource, this may weigh in your favor. Another thing to consider is if your use is educational. Using materials in the classroom is certainly an educational purpose. Remember, though, that this is only one of the 4 factors that determine fair use, so not all educational uses are automatically fair. The second factor examines the nature of the work. If the resource you'd like to use is factual in nature, you may have more of an argument for fair use over a highly creative work of fiction. The use of published works is generally favored over the use of unpublished works. The third factor that you'll need to examine is the amount and substantiality of the work that you'd like to use in your course. A common misconception is that you can copy a definitive amount of the work for your class, but the reality is that there is no predetermined portion that is allowable. In some cases, even a paragraph could weigh against fair use if that paragraph contains the heart of the work. A general suggestion is to take exactly how much you need and no more. For example, don't post a full article if only a page or 2 is necessary. Finally, another important fair use factor is how much your use will impact the potential market for or the value of the copyrighted work. The more restricted the use, the less likely it is that the use will be found in violation. For example, placing course materials behind Blackboard and making sure they're only accessible to your current students may help tip the fair use scale in your favor. On the other hand, if you post the materials openly on the internet where anyone could access them, you would be depriving the copyright holder of significant potential income, and the use might be considered less fair. If the course materials that you would like to use were intended for an instructional purpose, such as textbooks, workbooks, or standardized tests, posting these materials would significantly impact the potential market for these items and usually will not weigh in favor of fair use. Because so much of fair use is subjective, there are checklists available to help you work through and document your fair use determination. It's always a good idea to keep records of the rationale behind your decision in case your use is ever questioned. What if you've examined all the options explained above and you still aren't sure that you can use the work? You're always welcome to reach out directly to the copyright owner to ask if you can have permission to use their works in your class. Sometimes a third party, such as the Copyright Clearance Center, could grant permissions on behalf of the copyright holder. The library can help obtain permission and will sometimes pay copyright fees on your behalf. Remember, you don't have to go it alone. The library is here to help provide you with informational copyright resources that can help you make important course material decisions. We also offer an e-reserve service that will add course materials to the content collection module in Blackboard for you. For more information on posting course materials, we encourage you to visit our website or contact a librarian.